The day my husband saved my brother's life was the proudest day of mine. I wept with gratitude when the surgeon said the transplant was a success, never once imagining that the kidney he gave wasn't a gift to my brother, but a price tag for my silence. It was a perfect, self-renewing organ of blackmail, and I was the one who would be paying for it for the rest of our lives. Just 3 weeks ago, our world was simple, or so I thought. My husband, Mark, was the kind of man other women openly envied. He was handsome in that rugged, unassuming way, a solid, dependable software engineer who fixed our leaky faucet on a Sunday and still had the energy to grill the best damn steaks in the neighborhood. We had a comfortable life in a quiet suburb of Charlotte, a life I meticulously planned and cherished. The two-story colonial, the golden retriever, the future nursery we'd just started painting a soft, hopeful yellow. We were that couple, the ones who held hands at the grocery store and still laughed at each other's stupid jokes after 7 years of marriage. He was my rock, the steady beat to the chaotic rhythm of my life. My younger brother, David, was the chaos. At 28, 6 years my junior, he was a whirlwind of artistic passion and charming irresponsibility. Where I was pragmatic, he was a dreamer. He painted stunning, moody landscapes that nobody bought, worked odd jobs to barely cover rent on his tiny downtown apartment, and had a smile that could talk its way out of any trouble. He was my parents' favorite, the prodigal son who could do no wrong, and my fiercest protector. Growing up, he was the one who'd punch a bully for me, and I was the one who'd quietly bail him out of whatever financial mess he'd stumbled into. We were two halves of a whole. Mark and David had a friendship that I'd always found endearing. Mark was the stable older brother David never had. They'd spend hours talking about classic rock, debating the merits of different craft beers, or teaming up against me in Trivial Pursuit. I saw it as a perfect merging of my two worlds, the two most important men in my life, bound by a genuine affection. Mark would often say, "He's a good kid, Sarah. Just needs to find his footing." I loved him for his patience, for seeing the brilliant, beautiful soul in David that I always knew was there. Then David's kidneys failed. It was sudden, aggressive, a rare genetic time bomb none of us knew was ticking. One minute he was complaining about fatigue, the next he was ghost white and collapsing at a family dinner. The diagnosis was a punch to the gut, end-stage renal disease. The doctors put him on dialysis immediately, a brutal, life-sucking process that tethered him to a machine 3 times a week and stole the vibrant color from his world. His wit dulled, his hands, once so steady with a paintbrush, now trembled. The transplant list was our only hope, but it was a bureaucratic purgatory with a waiting list years long, time the doctors quietly admitted he might not have. Our family was shattered. My parents, usually so stoic, were a wreck. I spent my days in a haze of fear, trying to juggle my job, hospital visits, and the suffocating weight of helplessness. Through it all, Mark was incredible. He researched diets, talked to specialists, and held me when I broke down in the middle of the night. He was the calm in our hurricane. And then he made the announcement. It was a Tuesday evening, after a particularly grueling dialysis session that had left David weak and despondent. Mark gathered my parents and me in the bleak hospital waiting room. "I'm getting tested," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "I'm a match. I have to be." I remember staring at him, my heart swelling with a desperate, painful hope. It was a 1 in a million shot, the doctors had told us. A non-blood relative being a perfect match was practically a medical miracle. But Mark was resolute. He went through the battery of tests, the blood work, the psychological evaluations. And against all odds, the miracle happened. He was a perfect match. The doctors were stunned. My parents cried and called him a saint, an angel sent to save their son. I just held on to him, my gratitude too immense for words. It felt like the universe was finally giving us a win. The surgery was scheduled a month later. The night before, our house was filled with a nervous, electric energy. David, looking frail but with a spark of his old self in his eyes, hugged Mark tightly. Man, I don't know how I can ever repay you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Mark just clapped him on the shoulder, a warm, reassuring smile on his face. You just focus on getting better. That's all the thanks I need. We're family. The day of the transplant was the longest of my life. I paced the waiting room, alternating between frantic prayer and numb silence. When the surgeon finally came out, scrubs and all, and told us both surgeries were a success, that the kidney was already functioning perfectly in David's body, the relief was tidal. It washed over me, so powerful it buckled my knees. Mark, my husband, my quiet, unassuming hero, had saved my brother. He had saved us all. A few days later, both of them were on the slow road to recovery in separate rooms down the hall from each other. The hospital was a chaotic place, and in the shuffle of transferring Mark from the post-op wing, a small bag with some of his personal effects got misplaced and sent to a different floor. A kind but flustered nurse handed it to me, apologizing profusely. "We're so sorry for the mix-up, Mrs. Collins." His paperwork from intake got bundled with another patient's discharge files. I waved it off, just happy he was okay. Back in his room, as Mark dozed under the influence of painkillers, I started sorting through the contents. It was mostly just the clothes he'd worn to the hospital and a book. But at the bottom was a large manila envelope that didn't belong to us. It had another patient's name on it. My first instinct was to return it to the nurse's station. But tucked just inside the unsealed flap, I saw a second envelope with Mark's name neatly typed across the front. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured it was just more hospital paperwork. But it wasn't. The document inside was titled Living Will and Testament of Mark Collins. My blood went cold. We had drafted living wills together years ago with our lawyer. I knew what ours said. This was different. This was new. My fingers trembled as I pulled the document from the envelope. It looked official, notarized, and dated just 2 weeks before the surgery. Why would Mark have a second living will? We had our originals filed safely in our home safe. This felt secret. I scanned the first page, my eyes catching on a clause that wasn't in our joint documents. It was a detailed addendum, a section dedicating a significant portion of his life insurance policy, a policy I managed and was the primary beneficiary of, to a trust. A trust for the lifelong care and support of David Miller, my brother. It was strange, overly generous, but I tried to rationalize it. Mark loved David. Maybe this was a worst-case scenario gesture, a way to ensure David would be looked after if something happened to him during the surgery. It was noble. Yes, that was it. My husband was just an exceptionally noble man. I tried to force the warmth of that thought to overcome the chill that was starting to creep into my bones. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Something was wrong. My gaze fell back into the larger manila envelope. Tucked behind the other patient's files was a thin bundle of letters held together by a simple rubber band. They weren't in envelopes, just folded sheets of paper. The top one was in David's familiar, artistic scrawl. The letter was addressed to Mark. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was an invasion of privacy, a line I knew I shouldn't cross. But the secret will had unnerved me, planted a seed of doubt that was already starting to sprout. My hands moved of their own accord, slipping the rubber band off, my breath catching in my throat. I told myself I'd just read one, just to put my mind at ease. The first letter was dated 6 months ago, right after David's diagnosis. It began. I can't do this. Every time she touches me, every time she looks at me with those hopeful eyes, talking about a future I might not even have, I feel like I'm suffocating. She's planning a life for us, and all I can think about is you. Last night, she fell asleep holding my hand, and I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, picturing your face. This guilt is eating me alive. How did we let it get this far? How do we stop it without destroying her? I read the words again and again. They swam before my eyes, the ink blurring into meaningless shapes. She touches me, those hopeful eyes destroying her. He was talking about me. David was writing to my husband about me. The room started to spin. I sank into the hard plastic visitor's chair, the crinkle of the paper in my hands sounding like a roaring fire in the silent room. I frantically unfolded the next letter and the one after that. It was a conversation on paper, a secret history of the past 2 years of my life. There were letters from Mark, his neat, practical block printing, a stark contrast to David's emotional script. They were lovers. Not a fling, not a one-time mistake. They were in love. The letters painted a horrifyingly vivid picture. Secret meetings on Mark's business trips. Late night calls when I was asleep. A weekend camping trip that David and Mark went on last fall, a trip I had encouraged, thinking it would be good for them to bond. Wasn't about fishing and hiking. It was their anniversary. The details were all there, mundane and soul-crushing. The name of a cheap motel an hour out of town. A reference to a song they'd claimed as theirs on the radio. The lie wasn't just a single thread, it was the entire tapestry of my marriage. My perfect, supportive husband and my adoring, chaotic brother had built a world together, and I was just the scenery. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to put my head between my knees. The air in the hospital room was thick, sterile, and I couldn't seem to draw a full breath. Mark murmured in his sleep, a soft groan, and I flinched as if he'd screamed at me. I looked at his peaceful, medicated face, the face of a hero, a man our entire family was indebted to, and all I could see was a stranger. A manipulative, cruel stranger who had let me paint a nursery for a child he probably never intended to have with me. The final letter was from Mark, written just a week before the transplant. It was the one that shattered what little was left of my composure. It was his answer to a frantic, desperate letter from David, who was clearly terrified of the surgery. David, Mark had written. Stop panicking. This is the only way. Think of it. After this, I'll always be a part of you. Literally. She can never get rid of me then, can she? How could she ever leave the man who saved her brother's life? How could your family ever turn against me? They'll see me as a hero. And you'll be tied to me forever. This isn't just about saving you. It's about saving us. This kidney isn't a gift, it's a promise. It's a foundation we can build on, right under her nose. We just have to be patient. I love you. Be brave. The paper fell from my numb fingers. It wasn't a gesture of love for my brother. It wasn't even a desperate act of a lover trying to save his partner. It was a strategic move. A calculated, psychopathic chess move to permanently embed himself in our family, to trap me in this sham of a marriage, and to indebt my brother to him for the rest of his life. The kidney wasn't a lifeline. It was an anchor meant to drown all three of us in its righteous, heroic glow. My gratitude, my pride, my love, it all curdled into a black, toxic sludge in the pit of my stomach. The man sleeping in that bed hadn't just betrayed me. He had weaponized his own body, his own selflessness, to ensure his lies could never be brought to light. I stumbled out of the hospital room, the letters clutched in my hand, my knuckles white. I found an empty family consultation room down the hall and locked the door behind me, leaning against it as my legs finally gave out. I slid to the floor, the cold linoleum a shock to my system. The silence was deafening, broken only by my own ragged, hysterical breaths that were somewhere between a sob and a scream. My mind was a slideshow of memories, all of them now tainted, recontextualized into scenes from a horror movie where I was the oblivious victim. Every knowing glance between Mark and David at family dinners. Every time Mark threw his arm around David's shoulder in that brotherly way. Every inside joke I never quite understood. It wasn't friendship. It was a performance. And I was the sole member of the audience, clapping and smiling, telling everyone how lucky I was. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. I was a fool. A happy, grateful, blind fool. I spent what felt like hours on that floor, just trying to process the enormity of the betrayal. It was a hydra, a monster with multiple heads. There was the infidelity, the simple, garden variety cheating that would have been devastating enough on its own. But then there was the collusion with my own brother, the one person on earth I trusted implicitly. They had united against me, shared secrets at my expense, and pitied me for my ignorance. And then there was the kidney. That was a master stroke, the move that elevated this from a pathetic, sordid affair to something monstrous. It was a violation so profound I couldn't even find a name for it. He had taken something that should have been the ultimate act of love and twisted it into the ultimate act of control. When I finally pulled myself together enough to walk, I felt like a ghost haunting the hospital corridors. I went to David's room first. He was awake, sitting up in bed, looking pale but better than he had in months. The color was returning to his cheeks. My mother was sitting by his bedside, fluffing his pillow and chattering excitedly about his recovery. "Oh, Sarah, isn't it wonderful?" she said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Doctor Evans said the kidney is working better than they could have ever hoped. Mark is a walking miracle. We are just so blessed." David smiled at me, a weak but genuine smile. "Hey, sis. Here we have your husband to thank for this." I looked at him, my little brother, the man whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose secrets I had kept since we were children, and I felt nothing but a cold, vast emptiness. The hero worship was already beginning, the narrative already setting in stone. Mark the Savior, the man who gave a piece of himself so David could live. And my brother, the recipient of this grand gesture, was now bound to his lover by a debt that was both biological and emotional. Mark's letter echoed in my head: she can never get rid of me then, can she? Over the next few days, I moved through my life like an automaton. I smiled. I brought Mark his favorite jello. I updated concerned family members. I played the part of the devoted, grateful wife. But inside, I was screaming. Every interaction was torture. When my father clapped a hand on Mark's shoulder and said, "Son, I don't have the words. Your family in a way I never could have imagined," I had to bite the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood to keep from laughing. The worst part was watching them together. The hospital staff had been lenient, allowing Mark to visit David's room in a wheelchair once he was strong enough. I'd stand in the corner of the room, a silent observer, watching the man I married and the brother I adored. I saw it all now with sickening clarity. The way Mark would adjust David's blanket, his touch lingering just a second too long. The private, fleeting smiles they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. The loaded phrases meaningless to anyone else but now screamingly obvious to me. "You look good, David. Really good." It wasn't a brother-in-law's encouragement. It was a lover's appraisal. David, for his part, was a mess of conflicting emotions. He was physically healing, but I could see the strain in his eyes. He was eternally, publicly grateful to Mark, but in his unguarded moments, when he looked at me, I saw a flicker of the same guilt I'd read in his letters. He was trapped. If he ever wanted to end things with Mark, how could he? Mark's kidney was humming away inside him, a constant, living reminder of his debt. He was shackled to his savior. My lowest point came the day they were both discharged. Our families threw a small, celebratory welcome home lunch at our house. The place was filled with flowers and balloons. My parents toasted Mark, calling him their son. Mark, looking wan but triumphant, gave a humble speech about how he didn't think twice, about how you do anything for family. He looked directly at me as he said it, his eyes full of that false sincerity I had once mistaken for love. And in that moment, I realized the full scope of my prison. He knew I could never expose him. Not now. David was still fragile, both physically and mentally. The doctors had warned us that depression and anxiety were common after a major transplant. The shock of this revelation could literally kill him. It would destroy my parents, who were finally sleeping through the night for the first time in a year. It would turn their savior into a villain, their miracle into a curse. And me? I would be the cruel, ungrateful wife who destroyed her family out of jealousy. The narrative was written, and I was cast as the villain if I dared to speak the truth. I was utterly, completely, and hopelessly trapped. That night, as Mark slept beside me in our bed, his slow, even breaths a mockery of my frantic, silent panic, I stared into the darkness and faced the impossible choice. Live this lie forever or burn my entire world to the ground. For a month, I chose the lie. I lived in a self-imposed purgatory, a polite, smiling ghost in my own home. I went through the motions of a loving wife caring for her recovering hero husband. I made him healthy meals, I monitored his medication, I drove him to his follow-up appointments. On the outside, we were the perfect picture of resilience and love. On the inside, every touch felt like a violation, every shared meal was laced with poison. I'd look at the faint scar peeking out from the top of his shirt and feel an anger so profound it made me dizzy. He hadn't just given a kidney, he had taken my entire life, my past, my future, and held it hostage. The silence was the hardest part. The cavernous, echoing silence in our conversations where the truth should have been. He would talk about work, or the news, or plans for the garden, and I would nod and respond, all while my mind screamed, "Dot. I know. I know everything, Dot." I would watch him, searching for any crack in his facade, any flicker of guilt. But there was none. There was only a calm, confident ownership. He had won. He knew it. My relationship with David was even more fraught. He was getting stronger every day, starting to paint again, the light returning to his eyes. But there was a new distance between us. Our easy, lifelong intimacy was gone, replaced by a strained formality. He was deferential to Mark, constantly checking in on him, thanking him, praising him to our parents. He was playing his part in the charade. He avoided being alone with me, our conversations always including a buffer. He knew that I was the one person who could, with a single look, unravel him. And he was terrified of it. The breaking point didn't come with a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in the attic, looking for a photo album for my mom. I came across a box of old home videos, dusty VHS tapes from our childhood. On a whim, I brought the old VCR down and hooked it up. The first tape I put in was from my 10th birthday party. There I was, all pigtails and missing front teeth, surrounded by friends. And there was 4-year-old David, my shadow, toddling after me, trying to keep up. In one scene, a bigger kid pushed me, and I fell, scraping my knee. Little David, in a flash of fury, ran at the kid and bit him on the leg. My dad had to pull him off. Later, the camera found us sitting on the steps, my arm around his tiny, sobbing shoulders, telling him it was okay. He had been my protector, my other half, my fierce, loyal ally. Watching that grainy footage, something inside me broke. This cold, distant stranger he had become wasn't my brother. Mark hadn't just taken my husband, he had taken my brother, too. He had corrupted the purest, most important relationship in my life. The lie wasn't just trapping me, it was destroying David, forcing him into a cage of guilt and obligation. And I was letting it happen. I was complicit in my own misery and in the slow erosion of my brother's soul. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I called David and asked him to meet me, just the two of us. He hesitated, making excuses, but I was firm. The coffee shop by your old apartment. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. It's important. He showed up looking nervous, clutching his cup like a shield. We sat in an awkward silence for a few minutes before I finally broke it. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. My voice was eerily calm. I know, David. He flinched. The color drained from his face. Know what? He stammered, but his eyes told me everything. I know about you and Mark, I said, my voice level. I found the letters. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. He didn't deny it. He just whispered, Sarah, I'm so sorry. And for the first time, I talked. I told him everything. Not just that I knew, but what I knew. I told him about the will. I quoted the final letter, the one where Mark laid out his entire, sickening strategy. This kidney isn't a gift, it's a foundation. I watched David's face crumble as he realized the full extent of Mark's manipulation. He had seen it as a twisted act of love, perhaps, but he had never seen it for what it truly was, a hostile takeover of his life, his body, and his family. I thought I loved him, he choked out, his whole body shaking. But he's a monster. What he did to you, what he's done to me. He trapped you, I said softly, and he used me to do it. He's counting on my love for you to keep me silent. He's counting on your guilt to keep you compliant. He's built a perfect prison for us. We sat there for a long time, two broken people in a quiet coffee shop. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. We were allies again. The resolution wasn't a fiery explosion. There was no dramatic packing of bags or screaming matches. It was a quiet, deliberate dismantling. I went home and confronted Mark. I laid the letters on the kitchen table between us. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, as if I'd discovered a minor logistical problem. So, he said, his voice cold, what are you going to do? Tell everyone? Destroy your sick brother? Ruin your parents? Go ahead, Sarah. Burn it all down. You'll be the one holding the match. No, I said, my voice shaking but clear. You've misunderstood. I'm not the one holding the match. I'm the one who owns the house. Legally, the affair gave me leverage, but I knew a messy, public divorce would fulfill his prophecy of destruction. So, we made a deal. An arrangement. To the world, we are still married. Mark still lives in my house. He is still the family hero. My parents and the world still see the perfect, grateful family. But the doors are closed now. We are roommates, business partners in the preservation of a fragile peace. He has his room. I have mine. His money, a significant, contractually obligated amount, is transferred into a separate account for me every month. It's not alimony. It's the price of my silence. David is in therapy. He's slowly untangling the years of manipulation and guilt. He's painting again, with a fervor I haven't seen in years. His relationship with Mark is civil, distant, and carefully policed by me. The debt is still there, a living organ inside him, but it is no longer a shackle. We know the truth. We carry it together. Some days, the bitterness threatens to swallow me whole. I see him at family gatherings, accepting praise, playing the part of the selfless savior, and I have to walk away before I vomit. I am trapped in a gilded cage, forever tied to the man who betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. But then I look at my brother, truly alive and finally free, and I know I made a choice. Not a good one, not a happy one, but the only one I could live with. Is it justice? No, but maybe, just maybe, it's a different kind of survival. And some days that has to be enough. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.